Hello, this is Unsewn with GameLeap, and in today's video, we're going to be giving you a mid lane tier list for patch 13.24. 13.24 is going to be the last major patch of Season 13. Riot has stated, since 13.24 is supposed to last about a month, that they might end up shipping a B patch later on in the patch's lifecycle to address some of the stronger picks of the patch. If that ends up happening, of course we'll end up covering that, but for now, these are going to be the strongest mid lane picks for climbing in patch 13.24a. Let's go ahead and get right into this tier list, starting off with C tier. C tier is primarily where champions go when their kit doesn't mesh that well with mid lane. A champion like Heimer, for example, doesn't do too well into long range control mages. He's way better at dealing with shorter range champions or setting up for bush cheeses. These two scenarios are few and far between in the mid lane, and thus that makes Heimerdinger not a great pick. Vel'Koz is another great example of a champion that simply is not that well suited for mid lane. His basic and easily outplayable kit makes it incredibly easy for assassin players to counterpick him and shut him down. Vel'Koz has a higher win rate, but the total amount of agency that he has over a game is incredibly low, and it's more up to your team to carry you instead of you to carry your team. When we draft any champion for solo queue, we want to ensure that we have some form of agency so that way we can dictate what happens around the map. When we pick a champion like Vel'Koz, we're not going to be strong in side lane, we're really good in skirmishes when the enemy team doesn't jump on us, but we're vastly more susceptible to ganks than we are to setting up kills ourselves. Solo queue is all about stacking the deck in your favor. If you play a C tier champion, you're unfortunately not going to be doing that too often. Next up, let's go ahead and cover B tier. In general, the champions in B tier have good kits, but bad numbers. A great example of a B tier champion would be Malzahar. Malz is known for having an anti-carry playstyle. His primary goal is to shove a wave and then look to go for an ulti on somebody that's either unsuspecting or vulnerable. The problem with this anti-carry playstyle is that it's unfun to play against, so Riot intentionally keeps Malz's numbers a little bit low. It's not uncommon for you to get a full Malzahar combo off on somebody and then they still walk away with 20% HP. This is a numbers issue. Katarina is another champion that is a great example of why B tier champions are B tier. Kat's numbers by themselves are quite low. What makes her strong, however, is how she abuses certain items. The on-hit effect changes for Katarina are one of the most negative changes that Riot has ever shipped for this champion. It leads her to a place where she loses about 90% of her matchups, but she's strong when she's ahead in economy due to her synergy with the on-hit items. Heartsteel Cat is a great example of this. Cat has always been an AP assassin. For as long as I've been playing the game, this champion wants AP to try and blow people up. However, this on-hit item synergy makes it that way Cat is able to build items like Heartsteel and get away with it. She can proc it easily using her E, she can proc it easily using her ultimate, and get multiple procs to make the item more gold efficient. Instead of playing our champion for their abilities, we're mostly playing our items for her item effects. For this reason, Katarina cannot be a strong pick because when her base numbers are good, she abuses items even harder than she currently does, which is unfortunately quite hard. This heavy reliance on items is a big contributor to why Katarina is stuck in the B tier, and you'll see that most of these champions also have a similar issue. Now that we have covered the B tier, let's go ahead and move on to A tier. Champions in A tier are going to be stronger than the ones in B tier, but usually have a more intricate enthusiast playstyle. A great example of this is Zed. Zed, when played at an average level, is not one of the stronger champions in the game. However, when he's played by an enthusiast or a one-trick, the effectiveness of this champion's kit goes up dramatically. This reward versus investment ratio is what keeps Zed as a low tier champion on top of having some weaker numbers balance-wise. If you're unaware, Rioters themselves have come out and stated that Zed cannot be buffed in any way, shape, or form because he's simply too frustrating to play against, and this is clear if you've played against a Zed OTP. The champion's numbers aren't that great, but he is so slippery and basically untouchable that they can't buff him in a meaningful way, which means that he has to sit in A tier. This champion will forever be good, but his strong kit limits him from being truly oppressive. Looking at the rest of A tier, we see this happen over and over again. LeBlanc, Akali, Yasuo, Azir, all these champions are very strong in the hands of somebody that puts the time into them, but picking them up or trying to abuse them from patch to patch isn't a super viable option. A lot of the champions that are present in S tier or an S plus tier are simpler to play for a higher reward without requiring the hundreds of hours of time investment that most of these champions do need. That being said, there isn't a single bad pick in A tier, they're just harder to master. If you ever want to learn any of the champions presented to you in these tier lists, head on over to GameLeap.com. We have some of the best tips and tricks videos that will get you onto Summoner's Rift as quickly as possible, so that way you'll be effective on any of these picks. I'll see you on the site. Let's go ahead and move on to the S tier champions. There are three big champions that I want to mention by name in S tier. Number one has to be Yone. This champion is a complete and utter menace in the top lane, but he is significantly more manageable in the mid lane. What makes Yone so strong isn't necessarily the state of his own balance, it's the state of Hullbreaker. Yone by himself is a menace once he does complete his boots, but Hullbreaker takes him to a whole new level of overpowered. Mid lane Yone does not abuse Hullbreaker nearly as hard as Yone in the top lane, and he also suffers from having a bad matchup into ranged champions at least until he completes boots. This weakness, while not being exceptionally glaring, is what prevents him from being an OP tier. That being said, if you want to play a melee carry or if you want to play Yone in general, I wouldn't let that discourage you from picking him up. This champion is great to one trick, he's just a straight upgrade to Yasuo, he's better in just about every situation, and once we get past that early game weakness and learn how to mitigate it properly, then we will have a truly monstrous pick on our hands. Next up, I want to talk about Akshan. This champion is a hyperscaling lane bully that snowballs out of control and has a bunch of team utility through the revive. On paper and in practice, this is one of the strongest mids in the game. That being said, what holds Akshan back isn't necessarily his matchup spread, it's going to be how difficult he is to play. Akshan's E requires a different mindset to most champions, which leads to an awkward sense of play. In order to play this champion to his max potential, we need to focus on 3 things: our opponent, ourself, and where we're standing in respect to terrain. Once we master these concepts, there is not a better AD carry mid to play. This champion is very oppressive, you should pick him up as soon as possible. His pick rate is quite low for how strong he is, and he's only going to get better next season with the new on-hit items. And finally, last but not least, we have Galio. Galio is a great answer to the Orianna and Syndra meta that's dominating solo queue. Players in lower elo games tend to miss position quite often. Galio is great for punishing these positioning mistakes. The shielding that he gets from his W passive makes him an okay pick into ranged harass, but what he excels at is keeping somebody stuck out of position. The strong, aggressive, initiating junglers that are good on this patch have great synergy with secondary engage and divers, which Galio is both of. This champion's at the very bottom of S tier. The only reason that he's in S tier is because of the synergy with junglers. If a Briar jumps in, then we can easily ulti her, CC the entire enemy team, go for a 5-man taunt, and then hit a knockup afterwards. His lane phase isn't the greatest, and he is very reliant on his team, but in a perfect world where all these things play out appropriately for us, this is a great secondary carry, especially if we're playing in a lower elo game. Only pick this champion into guaranteed AP mids and make sure that we have some sort of initiation aside from ourselves, and you'll do well, I promise you. This is a great champion when you play to his strengths, but do know that you won't be a primary carry, which is once again why he's only going to be an A and S tier pick. Now that we covered the S tier, let's go ahead and talk about Broken tier. Talon is going to be the first pick that we have in Broken tier. The tiny QOL change that he got to his range Q being a full auto attack reset has made his win rate go up by nearly a full %. This champion is easy to learn, his combos are quite simple, and his effectiveness is through the roof when somebody is not playing one of the other OP tier champions. When it comes to AD assassins, Talon is currently unmatched. The only thing that holds him back is his poor matchups into the other broken mid laners. Draft this champion whenever the enemy team picks 4 to 5 squishies, and constantly be looking for any small mistakes that your opponents make to punish them hard. Opponent takes 3 stacks of our passive, instantly go in and bleed them, take half their HP. If the enemy bot lane overstays, then you want to roam and dive them to snowball the game from there. If the enemy jungler goes back into their jungler low, you walk into their jungle and then you kill that jungler, so that way you can start your snowball. It is almost criminal how much damage that this champion pumps out at one item. As long as you hit that point, then you have a chance at winning the game, which is why Talon is one of our picks for Broken tier. Next up in Broken tier is one of our long-standing picks, and that is going to be Vex. This champion has been overperforming for quite some time, and it's no secret as to why. She combines basically all the good aspects of control mages with those solo queue resets that do so well. Against longer range poke heavy champions like Orianna and Syndra, we can clear the wave out from underneath them, and then post 6, if we land an R, we can easily get a kill. Against the higher damage snowballing assassins such as Sylas and Talon, we beat them in a straight on 1v1, and then whenever they use a dash, it only fuels our fears, so we're able to punish them even harder. If a Talon tries to trade us, we can easily W him out of his Q and prevent him from snowballing the lane, thus neutralizing him completely. This by itself is good enough, but because Vex is such a strong scaling and incredibly high damage, a neutralization is going to be a win for us. This means it will scale and be effective where this Talon champion won't be. Vex doesn't really have bad matchups aside from things like Xerath, and then once again, all it takes is one decent R to flip that matchup on its head. Great champion, you need to be playing her as often as possible, especially as a counterpick into the higher tempo dash happy assassins. Next up in Broken tier is going to be Syndra. This champion is disgusting and has been for quite some time. Riot is not planning to nerf her, unfortunately, until we see how strong she is with the new mage items, so she's going to be sitting here for a while. This champ basically does it all. She has great poke, she's good at neutralizing people due to her E, she has great AoE CC because of the E after using her R, she has great single target damage, and on top of that, her wave clear isn't too shabby. Her high-ish range, as well as her better than average mage mobility, also makes her a contender for one of the most slippery champions in the game when played properly. These things by themselves make Syndra very strong, but on top of all of that, she also hyperscales with a true damage execute. This champion is fraudulent. You need to be playing her as often as possible if you are a mid lane player. There are only 2 things that you need to know on this champion. First and foremost, if you don't know how to deal with Fizz, ban him out. And secondly, if you use your E, you want to be placing a Q where your opponent gets shoved. This neutralizes some matchups such as Talon, Sylas, and the like, so they're not actually able to lane into you. If you aren't great at playing into assassins, then play Vex instead of Syndra, but she's just as strong if not better for countering assassins once we do identify that counterplay appropriately. Orianna is next up in broken tier, and there's no secret as to why. This champion and Syndra basically do the exact same thing. They have high poke, they bully lane really hard, they scale disgustingly well, and they have great AoE teamfight CC. Orianna, in my opinion, is easier to play than Syndra, especially for somebody that's newer to mid lane, so I would say that you should play this champion due to her strong auto attacks and her lane bully potential. You can easily scale on this champion if you do want to go that route, but that's not going to be the route that wins you solo games. When you play Orianna as a bully and you constantly harass people, they don't really have an avenue to actually take to fight you on fair ground, and thus you will win the game through a war of attrition. Like Syndra, be wary of Fizz, and that's basically the only thing that you have to worry about. If we're playing in lower elo games, then I highly recommend Kassadin as well. This is a great broken tier champion, but only if we're playing below Diamond. Kassadin takes too long to scale to be an effective pick in higher elo brackets, but when Kassadin is not punished appropriately, this champion scales to a disgusting degree, and he gets really oppressive real quick. Let's say that you're like a gold mid laner and that Orianna and Syndra are constantly being picked into you. Players in these elo ranges make mistakes, and they're also not going to be the greatest at harassing us. This is where Kassadin shines, when we have an AP matchup and our opponent isn't great at bullying us in the early game. Once we hit 6, we're allowed to follow our jungler around and try to look for free kills. A kill or two from this point onwards is all it takes to snowball an entire game, and then it's GG from there. Make sure that if you're playing in the lower elo games, you actually want to run Ignite. If you're against a high harass matchup where you think that your opponent will respect you, then go Fleet Footwork plus Teleport. But most of the time we want to run Ignite on this champion with Electrocute and look to burst our opponent down at 6. Even on scaling champions, aggression is key. When you're playing Kassadin, make sure that you're still trying to trade with your opponent and snowball the game instead of just scaling. Our final, most OP pick of the patch has to be Sylas. This champion has shot up in win rate dramatically on this patch, and that's due to a few reasons. Number 1, the high tempo jungle picks are better for him. Number 2, Orianna and Syndra players do make mistakes, especially in lower elos, so it's easy to one-shot them when they're out of position. And number 3, Sylas's counters aren't in a great place right now. Another nice little bonus to this champion is the majority of the champions that are in meta do have fantastic ultimates for him to steal, which of course he does make better use out of. Run Flash Ignite on this champion, take your E level 1, try to trade your opponent, and if this level 1 trade is successful, when we hit level 2 we want to all in them with E into W. This will outright kill 99% of the mid lane roster if we play it appropriately. Try to play around your Electrocute cooldown if you can, but if you don't, then it doesn't really matter too much. You will kill your opponent at some point if you play aggressively on Sylas. Make sure that you're taking Everfrost on this champion. It makes hitting his Q2 very trivial. All we have to do is E in, use our Everfrost, and then we Q directly on top of our opponent. Then we can E2 immediately after, followed by a W, and then that's going to be our entire trade. Anyways, this was Unsewn with Gamely. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.